Good evening, everyone. This is Cathexis, once again here with Quantum Eraser to do another part in our Science versus Scientism series. This one's actually going to be our 14th episode. This one's kind of a, I don't know, kind of an addendum. John's been doing some great work with going through and to kind of make his case a little bit better with especially the evolution topic. And we see this, it's a huge issue within they call it the great debate community. And that's essentially what we're going to do. We're going to present a counter case to what they are offering. So once again, though, what we're finding is this living, breathing proof of actual scientism in motion to observe the arguments or lack thereof of this fairy tale that they are wishing to push forward. But we'll get into that in a moment. How you doing tonight, John?
Doing fine, sir.
Excellent, excellent. So we got your screen being presented. I'm actually just wanting to get right into it tonight because we got a lot to go over. So off to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So like you said, let's get right into it. The players, Professor P.Z. Myers. Then we have Steve McRae, CRISPR, Dr. Fiona Robertson, and Hogtie. And let me introduce you to them. This is Professor P.Z. Myers, Steve McRae, Dr. Fiona Robertson, and I know we'll get them, Hogtie, and CRISPR. 1 second. And CRISPR. There you go.
Very good.
So, Professor P.Z. Myers, PhD biology, per wiki, drifted towards evolutionary developmental biology. Evolutionary, we don't know what that is just yet. Myers is taught and researched at the University of Oregon, the University of Utah, and Temple University. He's currently an associate professor of biology at the University of Minnesota's Morris campus. He's outspoken against the intelligent design community and creationist organizations for decades, claiming that they're pseudoscience. He was interviewed in the movie Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. He had a couple cameos in that movie, and I would suggest to watch this because that's just another example of living, breathing scientism. Of course, we have Steve. He's the leader and the venue provider of the clown show. You remember Mr. Fossilized Soft Tissue? We have CRISPR, a biological major. And what, pray tell, is that, Steve? Dr. Fiona Robertson, purported retired PhD molecular biologist. Her most riveting rebuttal to the Dr. Mary Schweitzer presentation pummeling was gophers and hogtie. But before we get into this, from the movie Expelled, I'd like to spend a couple minutes here. Dr. David Berlinski. Let's put it this way before you can ask, is Darwinian theory correct or not? You have to ask the preliminary question. Is it clear enough so that it could be correct? That's a very different question. One of my prevailing doctrines about Darwinian theory is, man, that thing is just a mess. It's like looking into a room full of smoke. Nothing in the theory is precisely, clearly, carefully defined or delineated. It lacks all the rigor one expects from mathematical physics, and mathematical physics lacks all the rigor one expects from mathematics. So we're talking about a gradual descent down the levels of intelligibility till we reach evolutionary biology. We don't even know what a species is, for heaven's sakes. Finally, thank you, sir. And remember, we talked about this, my questions. The 4 questions that I posted in the evolution presentation that I still haven't got any answers from and never will. Nobody in 12 years from the hallowed halls of academia has answered any of them. So, to the clown community, Answer these questions. They've already been posted to you before, but all I've gotten back was crickets and diversions. So, the science topics for today. From the Pretender Clown Show, we got human chromosome 2 fusion. Excuse me, the Dover trial. Soft tissue collagen DNA. We're going down that road again. Peer review and the Dover trial. So let's cut away here briefly. Okay, see if you can follow this. From the Introduction to Theory and Application of Molecular and Quantum Mechanics, the final arbiter of truth in science is experiment. From the Chair of Physics at Yale, Professor Shanker, the only way things change in physics is experiments. Everything is based on experiment. That's the only way we change our mind. From Richard Feynman, if it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And that simple statement is the key to science. From Max Planck, experiment is the only means of knowledge at our disposal. Everything else is poetry, imagination. From University of Rochester, the physics lab, the scientific method requires that a hypothesis be ruled out or modified if its predictions are clearly and repeatedly incompatible with experimental tests. Further, no matter how elegant a theory is, its predictions must agree with experimental results if we are to believe that it is a valid description of nature. In physics, as in every experimental science, experiment is supreme. An experimental verification of hypothetical predictions is absolutely necessary. Are we clear here? Any questions? Okay. Experiment from Penn State University. There should be 3 categories of variables in every experiment: the dependent, independent, and control. Are we clear? Any questions here? Okay. The ultimate goal of each and every scientific inquiry is to reject or falsify the null hypothesis. And what is that? The null hypothesis, the zero difference or no difference hypothesis, predicts that changing one variable, the independent variable, will have no effect on the variable being measured, the dependent variable. So if you don't have a viable independent variable, how in the world can you even formulate the null hypothesis, let alone reject it, por favor? Are we clear? Any questions here? Good. See you next year in 6th grade. So go ahead and start.
All right. Here we go.
Okay. Because it is later for you because you should say in the afternoon, and your afternoon is different from ours.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's known as CRISPR here. So CRISPR meet PZ Myers meet CRISPR. CRISPR is a biological major. Let's just say that. We already have a few other people. Riff has been invited, and obviously Dr. Fiona Robertson, Hogtie Champ, and a few other people. We just got done reading your blog post, by the way.
Okay, very good.
So I kind of wanted to discuss that a little bit because I think you make a wonderful point to Dr. Tomkins. Because I'm just going to jump right into it if you don't mind. That why is he not looking at the sentient of this whole thing? And the people that don't know what we're talking about, we are discussing the human chromosome 2, and that under the modern understanding of how chromosome number 2 came about, it was a fusion of ancestral primates, chromosome 2A and 2B. And all the evidence that I've looked at in CRISPR and Fiona and everybody else seems to indicate that it was a fusion. And Dr. Tomkins from ICR and AIG seems to not want to accept that and has been going literally end over end, coming up with all these strange things to try to to try to falsify that. And you had a blog post today. It's on your freethought.blog, freethoughtblogs.com, called "Would You Like to Play a Game?" And you just make it very simple. Look at the sentence.
Yeah. It's a totally trivial thing to do. You just use ensemble, and you can get in there, and you can compare, the details of chimpanzee and human chromosomes, and they line up. I don't even see how anyone can make this argument against it anymore.
Well, that's what I was asking Christopher. I was like, look, if we could see there's an overwhelming synergy between these things, what is the other explanation? What is the plausible explanation besides the fact that our chromosomal makeup came from earlier populations, earlier species? Everything is kind of repurposed and recycled and changed. But there's such a degree of relationship between us and chimps that's undeniable.
Yeah. Well, and further, why are they arguing with it? Because, you could imagine if you were a believer that God just did it that way. And why do you have to go around denying the physical evidence that's out there?
I mean,
So with P.Z. Myers, along with the human chromosome 2 fusion, why are they arguing with it? Why go around denying the physical evidence that's out there? Well, we're not. We're laughing at it. And you, Dr. Tomkins from AIG, or anyone else for that matter, shouldn't have even entertained, much less written on, the complete argument from ignorance, affirming the consequent, and begging the question fallacy. The Triple Crown. Congrats. To begin with. So, P.Z. Myers evidence, synteny. This is from nature.com, a term used to describe the state of two or more genes being present on the same chromosome, though not necessarily linked. So, back to, okay, let's look at scientific evidence from the Law Dictionary. The testing of a hypothesis or theory that is objective and in a controlled environment. Where did we hear that before? So, and I know this is going to sound like Greek to you, but where's the formal synteny scientific hypothesis, then experiment that is a hypothesis test that validates your physical evidence, PZ? And since there are two hypotheses in every experiment, like we just went over, or hypothesis test, post the null hypothesis that was rejected or falsified. Audience tip, don't hold your breath, because they don't, never, and never will exist. And remember, no hypothesis equals no experiment, which equals no science. So all that's left, like Max Planck said, is poetry and imagination. So what they do is they look at genes. Those are concrete nouns, no phenomenon. They skip the first step of the scientific method, make a comparison, conjure up a just so story, and then ask us to disprove it. It's the acme of foolishness to even attempt to disprove a complete argument from ignorance fallacy, Sherlock. Do you find it scientific or logical to imagine things, then have other people attempt to disprove your imaginings before you give scientific evidence of your imaginings? This is tantamount to claiming that invisible three-toed gnomes throwing pixie dust in a black hole behind the Crab Nebula are responsible for creating dark matter. Then you ask us to disprove it. If not, therefore your claim is true. I mean, preposterous. This bud's for you. All this nonsensical buffoonery, chromosome 2 fusion, is just another fiasco in the never-ending post hoc observation parade of repackaged evolution fallacies, vestigial structures, junk DNA, ring species, fossils, punctuated equilibrium, Piltdown Man, Lenski's E. coli. Yeah, I'm still laughing, by the way. To establish this: universal common descent, or the tree of life. Number one, if ancestry is not assumed from similarities, then there is no correlation between similarities and ancestry. Ergo, to make the argument, you need to make the assumption. So, P.Z. Myers, right from Jump Street, you're assuming the very thing you're attempting to prove. That equals a textbook begging the question fallacy. Number two, then they all take this form, a textbook affirming the consequent formal logical fallacy. If P, then Q. Q, therefore P. That is, if evolution is true, P, then insert any Darwinian grab bag post hoc observation, fossils, homology, similarity, genetic variation, Q. We observe the post hoc observation, Q. Therefore, evolution is true, therefore P. Or, in this case, if common ancestry is true, P, we will observe similarities, Q. We observe similarities, Q. Therefore, common ancestry is true, therefore P. The fallacy is that P doesn't necessarily follow from Q. Another example, if I had just eaten a whole pizza, P, I would feel very full, Q. I feel very full, Q. Therefore, I've just eaten a whole pizza, therefore P. Couldn't I have eaten a 20-ounce ribeye with fries? Or the old 96er? Let's put this quackery out of its misery quick. From Dr. Craig Venter, atheist evolutionist, the grand poobah of geneticists, the geneticist of geneticists, in front of God and everybody, about 1,500 people in the auditorium, a Nobel Prize panel, he comes out and says, there is no tree of life. It's an artifact from early scientific studies that aren't holding up. So, there is not a tree of life. The audience gasps. Dawkins and Krauss on the panel turned different shades of green. I would suggest watching this, and the description, this video is in the description of this video. And you're going to tell right off the bat who's the big dog on the panel. He doesn't say much, but he's like E.F. Hutton. When he talks, people listen. So you hear that sound? That's common descent fairy tale carousel circling the drain at light speed, as if he actually needed to say it. From Takada, genetics perspective on the origin and history of humans. This is population genetics. Even with DNA sequence data, we have no direct access to the process of evolution, whatever that is. So objective reconstruction of the vanished past can be achieved only by what? Creative imagination. Go on to 910.
You got it.
Sorry, my words are churning around my head with the pink hamsters. I'd like to know PC's take on that. You know, if we seem to be gradually going backwards again.
Well, now, you know, I don't think we are. I think we're going in circles. But we've always gone in circles. You know, I remember engaging with creationists in the 1980s and the 1990s, and you brought up these absurd arguments that they still bring up. It's like they never learned anything. To have any stamina in this business of fighting creationists, you've got to have a lot of patience, because you will hear the same boring, tedious, wrong arguments over again.
So, PZ Myers, well, I don't think we are. I think we're going in circles. Yeah, I agree with that too. You will hear the same boring, tedious, wrong arguments over again. PZ, your claim here is tantamount to a defense attorney appealing to the jury by saying, the prosecutor just keeps on repeating the same boring, tedious things over and over again. You know, the fingerprints on the murder weapon, DNA of my client underneath the finger or the victim's fingernails, closed circuit TV capturing my client in the very act of murder. But since the prosecutor hasn't revealed anything new, therefore my client is innocent. That's it. That's what you're appealing to here. The analog, the prosecutor's me, the defense attorney's you, my evidence that's repeating, functional DNA, RNA, and proteins, information, irreducible complexity, functional sequence, specified complexity, laws of thermodynamics, quantum mechanics. Your client, atheism and evolution, whatever that is. 1415, sir.
all of intelligent design is religious, all of it. There's no such thing as an honest, objective scientific approach that would promote the idea of intelligent design.
So, P.Z. Myers, all of intelligent design is religious. All of it. There's no such thing as an honest, objective, scientific approach that will promote the idea of intelligent design. Really? And your support for this scintillating declaration is what? Just what you say? Have you ever heard of generalized sweeping ipsy-dixit hand-wave dismissal baseless bare assertion fallacies? You're whistling past the graveyard, PZ. You obviously missed. Cover your ears, darling. My full exposition here. Science versus Scientism, episode 11. Evidences for a creator. And just to let you know beforehand, there's actual science in here. The scientific method. Go ahead and roll on to 3608.
And I would also point out, along the same lines that we just said, is one of the things I do in my genetics class is, I'm teaching genetics. I just gave them a log section where we figured out inversions and translocations and how those look.
So, P.Z. Myers, I'm teaching genetics. You teach genetics? Really well. Number one, functional DNA, RNA, and proteins never spontaneously form naturally outside already existing cells from sugars, bases, phosphates, and aminos, respectively. It's physically and chemically impossible, PZ. That's just the hardware. To refute, please show a functional 30-mer RNA or protein, most are 250 amino acids or longer, that forms spontaneously, naturally, outside a living cell or organism from sugars, bases, phosphates, and aminos, respectively. And cite source, please. The smallest functional DNA or genome is a little over 100,000 nucleotides. So that ain't happening. Conclusion from the grand poobahs of origin of life research. That's Joyce and Orgel. We conclude that the direct synthesis of nucleosides or nucleotides from prebiotic precursors in a reasonable yield and unaccompanied by larger amounts of related molecules could not be achieved by presently known chemical reactions. Dr. Leslie Orgel's last published words, literally, after more than 50 years of origin of life research. However, solutions offered by supporters of geneticist or metabolist scenarios, this is genes versus protein first, that are dependent on if pigs could fly, hypothetical chemistry, are unlikely to help. That's not the worst part for you. The woolly T-Rex in the room is how did stupid atoms write their own software? In other words, show how ink, paper, and glue molecules can offer technical instruction manuals and blueprints. From Professor Davies, DNA is not a special life-giving molecule, but a genetic data bank that transmits its information using a mathematical code. Most of the workings of the cell are best described not in terms of material stuff, hardware, but as information or software. Trying to make life by mixing chemicals in a test tube is like soldering switches and wires in an attempt to produce Windows 98. It won't work because it addresses the problem at the wrong conceptual level. That is, P. Myers, after showing us pigs flying hypothetical chemistry, that's formation of the functionally, sequentially specific complex motifs, DNA, RNA, or functional proteins first, naturally from their respective building blocks, which, as we noted above, is physically and chemically impossible outside living cells and organisms. Then, to remain logically consistent with a materialist, methodological naturalist, atheist position, you must conclude when viewing DNA, the genetic code, and its attributes, that stupid atoms and molecules somewhere in Shangri-La not only created the code, but then conducted a meeting between DNA and not exhaustive, messenger RNA, the IFs, EFs, and RFs, both subunits of the ribosome, all the transfer RNAs and the amino acyl tRNA synthetases, which then hammered out the convention, meaning in the software, and processes, 1/1000th of which would make Einstein blush, and any conflicts to make sure everyone was on the same page, so it and they could survive. Because no functional protein-y, no life-y. Of course, everyone attending the meeting, save for DNA, messenger RNA, and transfer RNA, are already in whole or in part functional proteins, which then begs the question, where did the first functional proteins, which are coded for on DNA and takes the entire process above the make in the first place, come from? Minor detail, eh? Then they closed the meeting and went for cocktails. Then at the bar, they discussed how they were going to handle water. 75% of all cells, especially the problematic ester bond between the amino acid that the amino acyl tRNA synthetases just forged with tRNA and proofread, that has a half-life of 0.5 seconds in water, where this particular process is all taking place, and then the RF, that with one itty-bitty H2O molecule in the A site within the ribosome, causes the entire complex to break apart and stop translation. See above, no functional protein-y, no life-y. And where'd you get the ribosomes from? Arguably the most functionally specific complex two-part machine in the biosphere, which is a ribonucleoprotein complex. That's a football bat without the 49 functional protein motifs in the large subunit and the 33 functional protein motifs in the small subunit. Pray tell, where'd they come from? Then PZ Myers, since there's no free lunch, and since the delta G for protein synthesis is positive, for all you Tulop fans out there, had to bring GTP and ATP into the mix, along with all the sub-processes that make them, coded on DNA, because without the specific energy source, type, currency, and placement and timing, would be like watching the space shuttle launch after they sprayed the outside with diesel. Wiki that. Give that to your students. And that's not even discussing post-translational modifications. I'm just spitballing here, but I think you may need a new Just So story. Oh, and by the way, see those initiation factors, elongation factors, and release factors? They are functional proteins. Where'd they come from? They are absolutely necessary to begin, regulate through, and end the entire functional protein manufacturing process, DNA translation, spoken in detail above. Is this a space shuttle giving birth to the space shuttle assembly plant scenario? And yes, it gets better. Let's say I remove one of those initiation factors or an elongation factor from the milieu. What happens to DNA translation in total? Yes, that's right. It's a football bat. It's a pillow hammer. You get zero translation, no functional protein synthesis. And guess what that means besides vapor lock? The entire process, DNA transcription and translation, along with thousands of others, is irreducibly complex. Then, PZ Myers, please show the physiochemical links here between the codons here and the amino acid or instruction. We want to see that one. And these are messenger RNA codons. This is a different language from DNA. I mean, a quarter of the DNA language is missing here, right? That's like me taking A through G out of the English alphabet, then writing you some messages and then sending it to you, and you have to decode them. That'll be tantamount to showing the physiochemical link between CAT and this. I'd like to see that happen. Somebody check its fur. Of course, now, since the cat's out of the bag, we'll probably get ye old customary ad hoc Nebraska man style Presto Magico branded CAT and Tobago dug up from the Pleistocene layer that has cat etched in its fossilized soft tissue. Of course, though, the fine folks in Croatia are screwed because they call it Machka. I suppose they'll just call it Isgleising Svinsky Zub, the chiseled pig's tooth. And let's take a close look here at what Ed Lewis has to say about the laws of genetics. This is kind of interesting. I want you to comment on this, PZ. So, the laws of genetics have never depended upon knowing what genes are chemically, and would hold true even if they were made of green cheese. I wonder what he's trying to tell us here. I'll be expecting a response to this, Professor P.Z. Myers. If not, you're a pretender, partner. Capiche? Go ahead and roll on to 5757.
These people, again, not any kind of intellectual superiority. I certainly do not qualify, but the people that are here in this group, very, very educated people, to say the least. But when these people read something off a blog post, like from ICR, or they read just something on chemistry, and they literally think they are on an equal par to somebody who has a PhD, such as yourself or Fiona or whoever, isn't that a little bothersome that people put in the work to actually, again, not to appeal to the title, but somebody who's demonstrated a proficiency in the subject, and then you have these other people that have no proficiency, no basal understanding, nothing that they can draw upon, and make the most fundamental errors that you, as a first-year student in high school, probably would have not made.
Right. Well, yeah, I'll repeat. I do not like arguments from authority, and I certainly wouldn't want them to believe it because I have a PhD. What's more important, I think, is that you can have people who clearly, in simple English, can explain these phenomena, and there's no excuse for not understanding it, no excuse for ignoring the logic behind it, and yet they do.
So, P.Z. Myers, I do not like arguments from authority. I certainly wouldn't like them to believe it because I have a PhD. Professor, that's not an appeal or an argument to authority. Appeal to authority fallacy is committed when the person in question is not a legitimate authority on the subject. Now, if I wanted to provide proofs, I had claims for quantum mechanics, and I posted citations from Anton Zellinger or Yunhoo Kim or Werner Heisenberg. That's not an appeal to authority. They are legitimate authorities and experts in their subject area. The same thing with genetics. If I wanted to post some citations from Dr. Venter, John Sanford, or Ed Lewis, those aren't appeals to authority. They are legitimate authorities and experts on the subject. Now, if you appeal to authority regarding anything from you, PZ, then yes, you are correct. It's a clear appeal to authority. Go on to 2525.
I have the air quotes going on when I say paper, because he's the one in his, and I do that specifically because he's the one that actually said in his email to me that a peer review paper coming out, and I had asked him, when you say, but quote, I say, when you say peer reviewed, do you mean actual peer reviewed in a recognized scientific publication, or do you just mean your friend said, oh, you know what, hey, Jeff, this looks really good?
Yeah.
That's not peer review.
I did have to chuckle, actually, Steve, when you said that in an earlier hangout that he'd said to you through email about, well, wait for this peer-reviewed paper to come out. I said, that's really funny because no one in academics actually refers to the people just say, oh, yeah, I got a paper coming out in whatever journal next month. Nobody ever says, I have a peer-reviewed paper coming out because it's odd, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, but I'd like to know where, if it is peer-reviewed, where it's being published, because there's hack journals like Complexity and Facts and Facts and a bunch of others that they cobble together, but they're not true peer-reviewed journals. They're crony-reviewed journals.
Yeah. Well, that's it. They play upon the slight misnomer that is the term peer review, because the intent isn't, well, we want to get your peers in terms of your colleagues at your institution or your friends or your family members. It really is about expert review. So, and it's for the benefit of people who don't, when a paper is submitted to an editor or an editorial board, they actually look at the material and try to figure out, well, which little mini pigeonhole does this fit into, and then identify a pool of experts in that particular subfield. And it's not simply that they have this like regular pool of, oh, this is kind of physics. Well, we'll send it to these kind of physics people. So it really is meant to be specific expertise reviewed. But the term peer review, they kind of play upon that and say, well, these are our peers, our other churchgoers are our peers.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got a back and forth between Steve, Hogtie, and PZ on peer review. PZ says, they're not true peer-reviewed journals. They're crony peer-reviewed journals. Speaking about creationists, right? So, like your crony secular journals, right, PZ? Can you post the peer review step in the scientific method for us? So votes and consensus, eh? That's political science. Empirical science is based on hypothesis testing. Peer review is the antithesis of real science. The scientific method was created to rid the landscape of bias. That's loudest voices, the ruling class, the majority, votes, consensus, opinions, the subjective, by instituting a method solely focused on the objective, that is the empirical, observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable, the process of the scientific method. You and your cronies appeal to it because it's the only way to get your fairy tales into the mix, whereby bastardizing it. From Lee and Sugimoto, Bias in Peer Review, the Journal of the American Society for Information Science and Technology. Research on bias in peer review also suggests that peer review is social in ways that go beyond the social categories to which authors and reviewers belong. Relationships between individuals in the process impact outcomes. For example, affiliation bias. Make decisions conditioned on beliefs about what others value. For example, publication bias. From Smith, peer review, a flawed process at the heart of science and journals. So we have little evidence on the effectiveness of peer review, but we have considerable evidence on its defects. In addition to being poor at detecting gross defects and almost useless for detecting fraud, it is slow, expensive, prolific of academic time, highly subjective, something of a lottery, and prone to bias and easily abused. Yep, sounds like science to me. Dr. Goodstein from Caltech. Editors of scientific journals and program officers at the funding agencies have the most to gain from peer review, and they steadfastly refuse to believe that anything might be wrong with the system. Their jobs are made easier because they have never had to take responsibility for decisions. They are also never called to account for their choice of referees, who in any case always have the proper credentials. Since the referees perform a professional service almost always without pay, the primary responsibility of the editor or program officer is to protect the referees. Thus, referees are never called to account for what they write in their reviews. As a result, referees are able, with relative impunity, to delay or deny funding or publication to their rivals. When misconduct of this kind occurs, it is the referee who is guilty, but it is the editors and program officers who are responsible for propagating a corrupt system that makes misconduct almost inevitable. This is the kind of misconduct that is, I fear, rampant in all fields of science, not only biomedical science. Recently, as part of a talk to a large audience of mostly young researchers at an extremely prestigious university, I outlined this analysis of the crisis of peer review. The moderator, a famous senior scientist, was incredulous. He asked the audience how many disagreed with my heresy. No one responded. Then he asked how many agreed. Every hand in the house went up. The only aspect that should be expertly reviewed should be whether or not the researchers followed the scientific method. It should be positioned right above the abstract. This thing, the scientific method, these all should be listed out and a brief synopsis of what these things are in the study. If they're not listed or are incoherent, then hasta la vista, baby. That's how we clean this mess up. Of course, then, NCBI database will have like 3 or 4 studies in it. Astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology, theoretical physics will take their rightful place at the bottom of the sci-fi section. Paleontology, archaeology, anthropology, geology will take their rightful place besides photography and bag of hammers observations. And evolution will take its rightful place in religious studies, myths and fairy tales, just below Humpty Dumpty. Will people lose their jobs? Yep. But PZ, we still need people to pick up trash. Go on to 737.
Design. And
Could I make an observation here? I'm not going to be very coherent because I'm not well. But this is an observation I've made, and I know that PZ Myers has been involved for a number of years. But if I cast my ancient mind back to 2005 and the Dover trial and all the rest of it, and then I look at what we're dealing with today, I feel that today we are back where we began before Dover.
you think we lost a lot of ground?
Yes, I think we have, because there have been so many new people coming in who are unfamiliar with what happened at Dover and why that happened at Dover and why the judge found the way he did, and it's all been lost in the dim and distant past. I did the hangout for the 10th anniversary of Dover. I got Ed Brayton in, and I was surprised at the number of people who didn't know the details of Dover. They didn't even know that the transcripts of every single day of testimony were available to be read. So I do think we've lost ground, because I don't think we have been forceful enough in a way. I'd like to, sorry, my words are churning around my head with the pink hamsters. I'd like to know PC's take on that.
Well, this is Dr. Fiona Robertson. She's bringing up the Dover trial. Essentially, this was the irreducible complexity trial. See the full exposition here. I'd wager a small fortune she or any on the panel could even define irreducible complexity. From Dr. Fiona, why the judge found the way he did? Well, that's easy. Much like you, he was absolutely clueless. Dr. Fiona again, I was surprised at the number of people who didn't know the details of Dover. They didn't even know that the transcripts of every single day of testimony were available to be read. You obviously were truant with the presentation above. Let's take a little snippet out of it. The Dover trial, aka Kangaroo Court. Firstly, since when are matters of science adjudicated by non-scientists? I'm sure Judge Jones was able to call on his vast expertise from the chair of the PA State Liquor Control Board, right? Who's next? MAD? The Boy Scouts of America? PETA? The Teamsters? We'll just throw this up to them, see what they think. Yeah, it's the only way your ilk can slip fairy tales into the discussion. Then strut your incoherent PhDs and titles around to the ignorant and uninformed. Mention redox reactions, cis-trans isomers, valence electrons, inverse square law. That is, baffle and dazzle them with pseudo-technical babble, which then greases the skids to then pass off your nonsensical buffoonery horsepucky that you have in the hopper all ready to go. And it has some semblance of veracity. It's second grade slick. But I see you. So let's have a look. At the end of the trial, a document is filed with the judge from both parties before a judgment is handed down. They file a document a finding of fact and conclusions of law document. So we have Eric Rothschild's from the ACLU and Judge Jones' ruling here in blue. So Eric Rothschild, the assertion that design of biological systems can be inferred from the purposeful arrangement of parts is based on an analogy to human design. Judge Jones rendering, indeed, the assertion that design of biological systems can be inferred from the purposeful arrangement of parts is based upon an analogy to human design. So Judge Jones adds indeed to the beginning of the sentence and up to on, his favorite maneuver, to make upon right here. Otherwise, it's the exact same sentence. Moreover, Judge Judy, does it strike you as strange or non sequitur when evaluating design that we would look at things that are designed so as to make a cogent comparison to design? Let's look at what design means: to create, fashion, execute, construct according to a plan, devise, contrive, to conceive and plan out in the mind, to have a purpose, intention, a specific function, specified complexity. Can inanimate objects design things? Do they contrive, plan, intend for a specific purpose, communicate with each other or other inanimate objects to reach a goal? Or are inanimate objects simply the medium used to design? Rothschilds, according to Professor Behe, because we are able to design or recognize design of artifacts and objects, that same reasoning can be employed to determine biological design. Judge Jones rendering, because we are able to recognize design of artifacts and objects, according to Professor Behe, that same reasoning can be employed to determine biological design. So Judge Jones decides to move, according to Professor Behe, right here, a little further away from the beginning of the sentence. Save for this phrase shift, it's the exact same sentence in total. And Judge Judy, it's yeah, duh, especially when you say biological design. Does design mean designed or non-designed design? Again, Eric Rothschild. Professor Behe testified that the strength of an analogy depends on the degree of similarity entailed in the two propositions. If this is the test, intelligent design completely fails. Judge Jones rendering. Professor Behe testified that the strength of the analogy depends upon the degree of similarity entailed in the two propositions. However, if this is the test, ID completely fails. So the judge adds a semicolon, and however, that was pretty tricky. That threw me right there for about half a second. He added another up to on. That's a favorite maneuver. Again, he made a pawn here. And then, real tricky like, replaced intelligent design right here with ID. The same sentence. Why did he plagiarize his judgment, you may ask? Well, it's quite clear. He's absolutely clueless. This is like a medical ICU-RD and a surgical ICU-RD submitting two plans to the attending physician as to the best course to treat a 68-year-old male on an event with a history of celiac disease involved in an MBA, either TPN or peg feedings, but the intending mindlessly calls in a certified public accountant to render their decision on the matter. The CPA in this scenario is Judge Jones, being absolutely clueless, and to save personal face, takes both plans, especially the one who he's sleeping with, the ACLU, and has his secretary rearrange or wordsmith some sentences so as to not out plagiarize and to feebly cloak, then pass his Neolithic incompetence by the attending, who has 12 other patients to get to before morning rounds are over in 10 minutes, a tea time in 45 minutes, and a medical review board meeting later that day discussing his late night escapades with 3 tranny midgets from the local carnival and his penchant for pounding Alabama slammers before going off page. If you wish, I can post the entirety of this cut and paste wordsmith fiasco, kangaroo court, which besides these juvenile word and punctuation games is Eric Rothschild's complete ACLU document cut and pasted for Judge Jones to render. Boston University law professor Jay Wexler, after the trial, who even opposes ID, part of Kitzmiller that finds ID not to be science is unnecessary, unconvincing, not particularly suited to the judicial role, and even perhaps dangerous to both science and freedom of religion. Well, let me tell you something here. The science is the ID part, the intelligent design. The religion is the evolution part. Who's a philosopher of biology? And even that title, I don't know. That's mind-numbing to me. But just like Darwin, they're philosophers of biology, has debated creationists and ID proponents on the national circuit for 40 years. Ruse was a key witness for the plaintiff for the landmark and nationally followed case McLean versus Arkansas in 1981, where they were discussing the same thing, where creation science in the classroom was being argued. So he's not your average Joe evolutionist. He's one of your pseudoscience priests. He said what everyone that could fog a mirror already knows. In the National Post of 2000, evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science. Evolution is promulgated as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity with meaning and morality. I am an ardent evolutionist and an ex-Christian, but I must admit that in this one complaint, and Mr. Gish is but one of many to make it, the literalists are absolutely right. Evolution is a religion. This was true of evolution in the beginning and is true of evolution still today. It's belief without evidence. Right here. It's the poster child.
Wow.
Go ahead and roll back to 617.
Gotcha.
Activity.
I would tend to think it's sort of like that one member of our community who once said DNA degrades in water, and then after that he just had to follow on. He couldn't let it go. Had to be right about it. You know, it's the same thing. They say something, and that thing has to be right from then on out.
Because they don't like being corrected.
Right? Yeah.
So CRISPR wants to get on the action, and this is a big thing over at the Great Debate community is DNA and water. So CRISPR says one member of our community who once said DNA degrades in water, and then after that he had to follow on. He couldn't let it go. He had to be right on it. It's the same thing. They say something, and of course Steve chimes in because they don't like to be corrected. And he follows up, yeah, right. Well, number one, DNA does degrade in water. It'll degrade in any medium if given enough time. Oxidation, UV, alkylation, hydrolysis, deamination, depurination. Without its repair mechanisms, it falls under, like everything else in the universe, the second law of thermodynamics. Heard of it? From Professor Eichmann from Vanderbilt. On a good day, about 1 million bases in the DNA in a human cell are damaged. There is a general belief that DNA is rock solid. Extremely stable. Actually, DNA is highly reactive. RNA more so. He didn't say that, I did. Here's the parent article right here in Nature. Go ahead and check that one out. And this one is talking about in vivo. What about ex vivo, outside the cell? From Thomas Lindell in Nature, Instability and Decay of the Primary Structure of DNA. You know what primary structure is, Great Debate community? Listen to this. Deprived of the repair mechanisms provided in living cells, fully hydrated DNA is spontaneously degraded to short fragments over a time period of several thousand years at moderate temperatures. That'll put an end to it, won't it? I doubt it, though. P.S. What came first, DNA or its repair mechanisms? Enzymes or functional proteins? Right? I want an answer to that one. I'll be expecting an answer to this on the next Pretender Clown Show. Please, please say RNA. I have the nail spike 44-inch Louisville Slugger sitting right here waiting for it. And number two, the they were saying. This is running rampant on all topics. They do that. If one person does it, it's they. This is a clumsy stereotype fallacy. So I had a spinning, long-age, apatheistic, agnostic, theological, non-cognitivist, aka atheist, tell me the other day that ink molecules were alive. Steve, do I need to explain to you why they're not? I mean, he's an atheist like you. He must believe everything you do, right? And how many times in the past 12 years do you think an evolutionist or an atheist has told me that DNA is made of protein? It's a big number. Do I need to explain to you why it's not? So for everything sacred and holy, can you please stop with these feebly puerile, logically fallacious train wrecks? It's well past embarrassing. Just say him or she or use their proper name, not they. Go ahead and roll to 128.51.
The debate that I have in 2 weeks, that is one of the things I'm bringing up about intelligent design. What is it about intelligent design that's going to help me do any kind of prediction or predictive modeling? If I want to predict what flu shot is going to be the most prevalent viral strain 2 years from now, and I understand in biology that, okay, I can use evolution to say horizontal gene transfer, mutation rates, blah, 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 phylogeny, la-di-da-di-da, it's going to be more likely this strain here kind of thing. And okay.
Hey, Cathexis, roll back to 128.51.
Yeah, I went a little too far there.
No problem.
128.51.
Yes, sir.
Start it again.
Yes.
There, with our existing theories.
And you know, it's funny you mentioned that because that's actually the debate that I have in 2 weeks. That is one of the things I'm bringing up about intelligent design. What is it about intelligent design that's going to help me do any kind of prediction or predictive modeling?
So, Steve, what is it about intelligent design that's going to help me do any kind of prediction or predictive modeling? Listen, ay caramba. I mean, we went over at least 50 posts explaining this to you in detail over at least 2 weeks. Number one, Steve, there's a big difference between scientific predictions and Gene Dixon, Edgar Casey, Nostradamus, Jimmy the Greek, and Carnival 10 predictions. That is, scientific predictions are the consequent of the necessary antecedent, independent variables. From Colorado State, scientific hypotheses, a special kind of prediction that forecasts how the independent variable will affect the dependent variable. A prediction in science equals the dependent variable. We'll see you next year in sixth grade. It's called the dependent variable because it's dependent on the independent variable. From Colorado State or California State University, notice there are two parts to a formalized hypothesis. The if portion contains the testable proposed relationship, and the then portion is the prediction of expected results from an experiment. An acceptable hypothesis contains both aspects, not just the prediction portion. And number two, a model. Here we go again. From physics about, a model is used for situations when it is known that the hypothesis has a limitation on its validity. Allow me to translate this for you again, Steve. It's pseudoscience, because there's no such animal as a scientific hypothesis with limited validity. It's tantamount to a woman being a little pregnant. Real scientific hypotheses are either confirmed or invalidated. Period. End of story. Scientific hypotheses don't exist in perpetuity or wait for more data. A model is conjured when the alleged hypothesis is untestable. That means there never was an actual scientific hypothesis to begin with. In conclusion, a predictive model is tantamount to married bachelors, military intelligence, and achromatic rainbows. Go ahead and roll up to 129.23. Or just keep it rolling right there.
All right.
If I want to predict what flu shot is going to be the most prevalent viral strain 2 years from now, and I understand in biology that, okay, I can use evolution to say the horizontal gene transfer, mutation rates, blah, 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 phylogeny, la-di-da-di-da, it's going to be more likely this strain here, kind of thing. And okay, now
Okay, Steve. If I want to predict what flu shot is going to be the most prevalent viral strain 2 years from now, and I understand in biology that, okay, I can use evolution, whatever that is, to say horizontal gene transfer, mutation rates, blah, 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 phylogeny, la-di-da-di-da, is going to be more likely this strain here kind of thing. So, Steve, all you're missing here is your clown suit. Seriously. So, go ahead and again, let me put my 4 questions right here. These are kind of important. So go ahead and answer those. Then, to support your train wreck here, we're going to need you to bring in an actual virologist or an immunologist into your carnival tent. Then after they answer the 4 questions above, we need an illustration by the numbers, how evolution, whatever that is, predicts flu strains 2 years in advance. Once you do that, once they do that, I'll come on your show and eat my shoe. And by the way, from Ian York, currently the team leader for the molecular virology and vaccines team in the immunology and pathogenesis branch of the influenza division of the CDC, says flu viruses don't integrate into genomes, so they're not involved in horizontal gene transfer, Steve. And phylogeny, that's code for your phylogenetic tree, or the tree of life. Do we need to go back and revisit Dr. Venter's take? If I'm not mistaken, he used one of those new Husqvarna chainsaws and turned it into kindling so fast it would have made Paul Bunyan blush. P.S. I agree with the blah, blah, blah and la-di-da-di-da. It's the most coherent and scientific explanation I heard from you ever.
All right, so back to Hog Tie 52, 55.
Hog Tie, this is first appearance.
All right.
I'm sorry. Well, he made a couple other ones, but go ahead.
And I think that the uphill battle on that front, so we look at what's actually found, and then they say, well, why would that be there? It's this weird thing that people think that stuff ought to fall apart on its own just because there's time. And it shows kind of a detachment from the reality of science overall, and in particular chemistry. So
what? Hog Tie. It's this weird thing that people think that stuff ought to fall apart on its own just because there's time. It shows kind of a detachment from the reality of science overall. Excuse me, and in particular chemistry. So we're back to the second law of thermodynamics and to the soft tissue preservation. That's the trail we're going down again. I suppose you rather conveniently forgot the pummeling of you, your great debate community, and Mary Schweitzer that was documented 2 weeks ago. Kind of forgot that part. So you're doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result? Alrighty then. So, Hog Tie, yes, it's called the laws of entropy. The second law of thermodynamics, pillar of science. From Isaac Asimov. In the game of energy and thermodynamics, you can't break even. From the Smithsonian. Another way of stating the second law, then, is the universe is constantly getting more disorderly. Viewed that way, we can see the second law all about us. We have to work hard to straighten a room, but left to itself becomes a mess again very quickly and very easily. Even if we never enter it, it becomes dusty and musty. How difficult to maintain houses and machinery and our bodies in perfect working order. How easy to let them deteriorate. In fact, all we have to do is nothing, and everything deteriorates, collapses, breaks down, wears out, all by itself. And that is what the second law is all about. From the entropy site.edu. In classical thermodynamics, it is viewing entropy increase as a measure of the dispersal of energy from localized to spread out at a given temperature. In molecular thermodynamics, it is considered the change in a system or surroundings of their total, for which there are fewer accessible microstates, to one which there is an increased number of accessible microstates. Right? So you got that. Directly opposite of what your claim is, just to let you know. That's all right. They're going to step into it again.
All right.
Continue.
You got it.
Just continue.
We have this thinking that, like, if you left some bananas in the fruit bowl on your table and just left your house for a month, when you got back, those bananas would have significantly degraded. Just on their own, they would have just broken up. That's sort of the layman experience about what happens when you leave organic material laying around. It just on its own, that is, time causes it to just deteriorate. But of course, you know, a little better level of engagement, what you're going to see is that those things are actual chemical processes, just like the chemical processes that cause things to develop and to grow. And I've asked this question of people, you know, having this discussion about how, well, whether or not DNA should break down when it's in water, for example, or whether or not collagen or proteins overall should just be like falling apart just because there's time available. And I'll ask them, like, what is the mechanism? Like, is it a hydrolysis reaction? Is it enzymatically catalyzed? And so they don't know, because they don't have any level of engagement with those fundamental principles of science, and especially as they apply to chemistry or biochemistry. And it's a point you have to, early in the conversation, shine the spotlight on, because they think that just over time these things should just fall apart. Of course they would.
They love the
But when you ask them for a mechanism for it, they don't know there should be one.
It's what to him is everything to them is entropy. Oh, it's entropy, or it has to decay over time.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
under their,
no.
yeah, well, under their understanding what entropy is, and there's something we said that there are some.
So we got Hogtie, Steve, and CRISPR here. So Hogtie, time causes it to just deteriorate. But when you ask them for a mechanism for it, they don't know that there should be one. Steve, everything to them is entropy. It has to decay over time. It's like, well, no. Thanks for that one, Steve. Priceless. I appreciate that. Of course, CRISPR has to get involved with that feigned exasperation. I guess he wants to tie his chain to that crazy train. That's all right. Go ahead and tie it. Well, Hog Tie, just hit up your partner, Steve, who wrote no less than 6 posts on the Mary Schweitzer Great Debate Community pummeling. Remember that one? Telling me that time is a cause. I'm still awaiting the responses for, hey, Steve, is time the cause of the difference of scores between the first and third quarters? And does time cause the sun to rise? He must have gotten busy. I haven't got answers to those yet. And Hogtie, are you asking for a mechanism and cause of entropy? You see, scientific theories explain the how and the why, the mechanism and the process, and identifies the cause. For example, germ theory. Scientific theories are the result of validated, confirmed scientific hypotheses that have been rigorously tested. As opposed to what we're talking about, entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics, scientific laws merely describe the what or the is. The cause is not applicable. They are based solely on observations, often expressed mathematically, like the second law of thermodynamics, the laws of entropy. With scientific laws, as I said, the cause and the how and the why, the mechanism, are both nonsensical and invalid inquiries. It's just an is and an are. For example, how or why does heat flow from hot to cold always? Well, we don't know, and we'll never know. All we know, every single time, it just does and is. Ergo, a scientific law. That's why they're called the laws of thermodynamics and not the theories of thermodynamics. This is junior high level stuff and is the quintessential example of why you're all pretender clowns. We're just shining a spotlight on it, Hogtie. P.S. The scientific and the scientific laws above is a misnomer. See my presentation here, episode 12. This is a 400 level course, so you may want to phone a friend. Go ahead and roll to 5557.
All right.
In an environment. Of course, this is a very, very different thing when you're talking about biopolymers, because those nuclei within a biopolymer, they're vibrating, but they're linked to each other covalently. So they don't just randomly, oh, well, now I'm attached to this, carboxyl group or something. So, but I'm not going to be attached to it anymore. I'm just going to wander over here, right? That doesn't happen. And it's difficult when you have these conversations with somebody who presents themselves as an expert in biochemistry because they've read some creationist web pages that uses the names of a lot of these complicated compounds, but they don't have the grounding in some fundamental understanding of the let me call it the physics of basic chemistry. And I think that's been a real shortcoming of the conversation.
Do you find that?
Okay, 2 points that he made. Hogtie says, of course, this is a very, very different thing when you're talking about biopolymers, because those nuclei within a biopolymer, they're vibrating, but they're linked to each other covalently. Number 2, because they read, here we go back with the they again, because they read some creationist web pages that uses the names of a lot of these complicated compounds. So let me take number 2 first. A, this is a stereotype fallacy, use they. And creationist web pages, yeah, that's a genetic fallacy. A genetic fallacy is a line of reasoning in which a perceived defect in the origin of the claim is the thing that is taken to be evidence that discredits the claim or the thing itself. And see, how do you know what they do? What's the method you use to arrive at your conclusion here? Crystal ball, dowsing rods, tea leaves, special Evo mind powers we're not aware of? Other? Undoubtedly the same method you use to arrive at your fairy tale worldview. Let's test your blind conjecture guessing acumen. What's my favorite color? So on to number 1. Of course, this is a very, very different thing when you're talking about biopolymers, because those nuclei within a biopolymer, they're vibrating, but they're linked to each other covalently, right? Huh? We're talking about collagen, the triple helical structure. Let's go to Bartazzo in Nature Communications. In particular, it has long been accepted that protein molecules decay in relatively short periods of time and cannot be preserved for longer than 4 million years. Therefore, even in cases where organic material is preserved, it is generally accepted that only parts of the original proteins are preserved and that the full tertiary or quaternary structure has been lost. Did you hear the pound? I'm doing that for a reason. We're going to get to it here in a minute. From the same reference, if collagen is completely degraded, this banding is no longer seen due to the loss of quaternary structure of the protein. Therefore, the observation of the 67 nanometer banding in the fiber structures of fossilized samples here is very exciting, as it is consistent with the preservation of the ultrastructure of putative collagen fibers over a period of 75 million years. Yeah, right. Do you understand the differences between covalent and hydrogen bonds? Like strengths, for instance? Do you know the 4 levels of protein structure by chance? You know the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structures. This is rhetorical, by the way. I know you don't know it, just by your comment above here. From the Molecular Cell Biology 4th edition, collagen fibrils form by lateral interactions of triple helices. So, many 3-stranded type 1 collagen molecules packed together side by side, forming fibrils with a diameter of 50 to 200 nanometers. In fibrils, adjacent collagen molecules are displaced from one another by 67 nanometers, 1/4 of their length. This staggered array produces a striated effect that can be seen in electron micrographs of stained collagen fibrils. The characteristic pattern of bands is repeated about every 67 nanometers. You see this? You see these? You see the functional quaternary structure of collagen, Hogtie, is conferred by interstrand hydrogen bonds, not covalent bonds. So your feeble straw man fallacy appeal to covalent bonds is juvenile and clumsily probing. Therefore, you're either deliberately attempting to deceive, or this is just another in a long list of Hanlon razor illustrations. That is, don't attribute to malice what can be explained by ignorance. In my humble opinion, it's quite clear both are at play here. Oy vey. All right, for the encore from Dr. Fiona. Go ahead and switch to the other video. This video is the next video right after PZ Myers just a few days ago. So go to 3:10:50.
All right, here we
Listen
go.
to this closely, folks.
All right.
To say that if you say you want to start with a self-replicating RNA molecule, it still had to have a sequence of nucleotides.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you're trying to suggest that a sequence of nucleotides self-assembled in an organic soup, maybe the famous warm little pond, then you have to demonstrate that.
It's been done.
Yeah.
It has been demonstrated. It was demonstrated. Somebody took ribose sugar and took bases and left them together. And the bases.
And here presto RNA arrives.
You will let me finish now, pal. You will let me finish. And the bases attached onto the sugar. And when they took those that had assembled, so you had a sugar and a base, and they put them together and they left them on their own, guess what they did? They assembled into a long chain.
RNA.
RNA.
They formed ribonucleotides
Yes.
on their own.
Yeah, but no, what I'm saying is, no, they formed the ribonucleotides, but then the ribonucleotides all attached to each other in a long chain, in a long polymer, giving you a sequence of nucleotides. That happens spontaneously. They've done it in the lab. They've done it. It is published.
Good.
Right, so you said they need to demonstrate it. They have done. So it
Demonstrated.
doesn't fall flat in its face, does it?
First of all, I want you to show me the paper. Second of all, I want to see what
I will look for it.
with,
Right.
whether it's good for anything to code for a protein or what.
It doesn't need a protein for a self-replicating RNA molecule.
That's
It doesn't need
It's-
a protein, but can it code for a protein?
It doesn't need to. At that point,
It
it
would
doesn't
be
need
used
to.
as if it didn't need, if it didn't code for protein, wouldn't it?
No, listen. Self-replicating RNA molecule. It doesn't need a protein. All it has to be able to do is replicate itself.
Look, if you did any biochemistry at all, you
I
would
am
know.
Excuse me, pal. I'm a biochemist and a molecular biologist. So don't
Congratulations.
come down and say to me if you've done
Then
any
you should know.
biochemistry.
You
Because
should
you can
know.
shut that. Now, what I'm telling you is this. When we're looking for the first replicator, the first cell replicator, all you want is a molecule that can replicate itself. It doesn't have to do anything else.
Oh yes, it does.
What I'm showing now,
It's useless
Can't
I'm showing.
somebody look up?
as a
Somebody
replicator.
please look up.
I mean, the whole
Lincoln and
essence of-
Joyce,
The whole essence of
2009.
Sorry, Fiona.
replicating.
Could you
Sorry,
look
can I
up?
finish?
I'm trying to give somebody a reference. Could somebody look up Lincoln and Joyce, 2009, self-replicating RNA? If you put those search terms into Google, you should get it. My computer's going slow. I can't.
No, I got a computer I can actually use.
You
So
get that? It's Lincoln and Joyce. Linco. That's it. N and Joyce.
self-sustaining replication of RNA enzyme.
Hold on. Joyce with a J. That's the one. Right. Self-sustained replication.
Tracy Lincoln and
There you
Gerald
go.
Joyce.
There you go. There's your paper. Self-sustained replication of an RNA enzyme.
That's
Those
it.
RNA enzymes are called RNA enzymes
These
because
are
they're made of
existing-
RNA and they are not made
These are
of.
existing RNA enzymes that are now.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. So, Dr. Fiona, Somebody took ribose sugar and took bases and left them together, and the bases attached onto the sugar. And when they took those, they had assembled a sugar and a base, and you put them together and left them on their own. Guess what they did? They assembled into a long chain that happens spontaneously. They have done it. It is published and demonstrated, right? Thank you, Lord. So, number 2, ribose plus a base is a nucleoside. That's a nucleobase, is a nucleoside. Ribose plus a base plus a phosphate is a nucleotide. You know, I didn't hear where that phosphate came from. Did you? I may have missed it, but I'm pretty sure it's not there. B, where'd you get the nucleobases from? For brevity, where'd you get cytosine naturally? From prebiotic cytosine synthesis from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Shapiro. No reactions have been described thus far that would produce cytosine. C, whenever you find pentose sugars, that is ribose, naturally or synthesized, they exist as a 50-50 mix of stereoisomers. They're enantiomers, mirrors, left-handed and right-handed. From Orgel, the grand poobah of origin of life research, again, equally disappointing. We can induce copying of original template only when we run our experiments with nucleotides having right-handed configuration. All nucleotides synthesized biologically today are right-handed. Yet, on the primitive Earth, equal numbers, 50-50 mix of right and left-handed nucleotides would have been present. When we put equal numbers of both kinds of nucleotides in our reaction mixtures, copying was inhibited. That means it didn't happen. D, my favorite. Have you heard of delta G? You know, the Gibbs free energy change? Peradventure. Every pre-biochem candidate knows apathetically that nucleoside synthesis and nucleotide synthesis is delta G positive. Guess what delta G positive is? Non-spontaneous. You said this was spontaneous. What's up with that? So I would suggest you file a claim against Tuco Community College in Tobago, where you obviously got your mail order degree from, and file a failure to provide services suit. You have an open and shut case. Then finally, the coup de grace. Dr. Fiona and a rah-rah fan club, right? Then appeal to the evidence. The self-sustained replication of an RNA enzyme I just showed you before. Now remember her claim. Dr. Fiona, somebody took ribose sugar and took bases and left them together. So she's starting out with just ribose sugar and bases, correct? That's what she's starting out with. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is the study I showed you, same one from Lincoln and Joyce, right? Self-sustained replication of an RNA enzyme. This is just a summary. It's behind a paywall. I couldn't get to the rest of the study. Can't do that anymore. But that's okay. I took the summary. I was looking for a hypothesis, you know, just searching, you know, you'd figure in the summary, well, the hypothesis is either validated or invalidated, you know, what science is, you know, and guess what? There's nothing here. So after that, I said, the heck with it. I'll just go down here and I'll go down to the end to check the references or the works cited page, see if I can't get anything in there. And guess what I found? I said the supplementary material. I found that one, right? So let's go ahead and pull this up. It's going to take its time here, obviously. And so I pulled this up, and guess what? It's Christmas in March. Guess what it gave me? The materials and methods section, like I talked about in the last presentation with Mary Schweitzer, right? I told you that's where you go. So let's go ahead and do it. This is going to be quick. Remember her claim, right? She started off with sugars and bases, materials, oligonucleotides. What? Did you read this, love? You obviously didn't. You started out with nuts and bolts. They're starting out with the carnival tent. So it's all downhill for you from here. Oligonucleotides were either purchased from, this is good, Integrated DNA Technologies in San Diego, or synthesized, let's see, the nucleotides were synthesized on Expedite Automated DNA RNA Synthesizer. That's pretty convenient from Applied Biosystems in Foster City, California. And using nucleoside phosphoramidites purchased from Glenn Research in Sterling, Virginia. Fiona, please show Integrated DNA Technologies, Applied Biosystems, and Glenn Research on prebiotic Earth. That's what we're going to need to see. My word. So, preparation of RNA enzymes and substrates. Let's take a look at this. All RNA enzymes and substrates were prepared by in vitro transcription. The transcription mixture contained what? 4 micrometers of DNA? Where'd you get DNA from? You were just in sugars and bases, the nuts and bolts back there. Where'd this come from? Did it poof itself into existence magically? These oligodeoxynucleotides. Then we get some ta-ta box action going. Yeah, the promoter sequence. Little ta-ta box action going on here. And then you got RNA polymerase. Jeez, oh, this is unbelievable. You got the tractors in the carnival tent here. My word. This is tantamount to claiming the natural spontaneous formation of the Aerojet Rocketdyne RS-25 engine. That's the main space shuttle engine. Then as your evidence for it, pointing to copper and iron ores. Thanks a lot. We appreciate that. It's crystal clear you have a woeful basic chemistry acumen, and you only looked at the headline, if that. P.S. Earlier, I challenged your brother-in-arms, Professor P.Z. Myers, with this. Perhaps you can call him and put your PhDs together and tell us what Dr. Lewis was attempting to elucidate here. Let me say this again. The laws of genetics have never depended upon knowing what genes are chemically and would hold true even if they were made of green cheese. Go ahead and get together. Please tell us what this means. I can't wait. To the audience, are the people in their arguments reviewed here pretender clowns or legitimate scholars worthy of our trust? Your call. By the way, oy vey.
Yeah, what a presentation, John.
Thanks for your ear. Have a nice day.
Yeah, I think this will greet them well. If they could stand to listen to it, hopefully.
Hey, Cathexis, sorry. Let me interrupt you. I want to go back. I want to make a correction because I made a mistaken case of identity on the Mary Schweitzer presentation. I want to correct that.
Oh, definitely.
Back, it was aired as. Okay, if the audience had watched that presentation, it was with Hogtie, and it went on for some minutes about Hogtie hammering the C4 fire because he was trying to sort of intimate that the fossils, that there was fossilized soft tissue and that these were fossilized rather than just bone. And what had happened was it kept going and it came to this part on 35, 37. I missed it. This was not Hogtie. This was Steve. Steve said this.
Well, it's so easy to mix them up when they're both talking nonsense.
Yeah, I couldn't discern the differences in voices. I want to apologize to Hog Guy for that. I did it. It wasn't intentional. This is all Steve, and this one was Steve also.
Very
So it's
good.
even better. I mean, Steve got into the act too, which is even better. And that's why I said the fossilized soft tissue, which is it's bachelors. But I wanted to go ahead and make that correction officially.
Well, that's very nice of you. Yeah, and I think it's definitely necessary. You know, what I'm extraordinarily happy to have you doing these more technical presentations, especially the past two. I mean, this, I will admit, this is a bit out of my depth. I'm more of a philosopher, but having you and your expertise on here, we need to have a counterbalance to this. You know, to me, and this is something that diverges, I think, what from most people's thought patterns. There's this dichotomy of creation versus evolution. And just as you presented evolution being a religion, as one of the great biological philosophers have once pointing out, what I see it as is that's a false dichotomy. What we're looking at here is scientism. My definition of scientism is, I mean, of course, the main definition is thinking science is the only way to find truth. I mean, that's what the standard definition is. But when you do research into it and you read the likes of C.S. Lewis or Aldous Huxley or Bertrand Russell, these men were warning us of belief systems that surrounded the scientific communities that were not necessarily rooted in actual science. And what we've seen over, I don't even know when to begin with it, but we have seen this throughout the ages since Francis Bacon established the method. Men like Darwin, who put out a dangerous idea that is not rooted in actual science, which is more of a biological philosophy, which I don't even want to get into the problems that it caused. But here we are today having a conversation like this where people, they're devoted to what appears to be a religious ideal. And when you call them out on it and show them the science that contradicts their belief system, they get very angry. That tells me that there's something wrong. That's what I call scientism. These ardent believers of this authority structure of the white coats, where they can't question the prevailing thought of the day. They're just going to rally behind it and support it through whatever mental gymnastics that they have in their head at the moment.
Listen, I agree with what you said. I'm still dumbstruck. I'm still back on the philosophy of biology. I haven't left that train yet.
Right?
So
Yeah.
I'm back there on that train. I'm looking around and it's not looking too coherent to me. I need somebody to explain to me what philosopher or philosophy of biology is. And you know, Ernst Mayr from Harvard, the evolutionary biologist, said the same thing about Darwin. He called it a new philosophy of biology. I mean, what on earth is that?
And this is the reason why I do this show, so that we can make the distinction. People have a false understanding of the scientific community, of what science is, of how this works. And you know, this is I mean this in a more mainstream way. You ask the average man on the street, they have no idea. They just believe, oh yeah, well, evolution, sure, Big Bang cosmology, yeah, that's what they tell us. Yeah, I believe them because they're smart. They've been through the 8 years of college. You know, they know. And I'm not discounting education. I'm not discounting the PhDs and whatnot. But there needs to be a distinction between real science and this scientism, this belief system, where you're going to do these mental gymnastics, where you're just going to read a line, read the abstract of this paper in 2009, not even realize, go and look through the materials and how they came up with this, and assert it as true.
This was a catastrophe. I mean, she said that she was a biochemist and a molecular
she asserted
biologist.
authority in that moment. She really did.
I was surprised that the guy that she was talking to didn't call her on it. I caught it right away. As soon as I knew what she was going to start with. She started with those sugars and bases. I mean, like I said, I'm telling it may be even worse than this. That a pre-biochem major would know this. I knew that before. I ain't even gonna go down that road. Let me take that back. All I'm saying here, that's so proby. I'm speechless, just speechless over that.
I mean, it happens,
So,
but you're right. Somebody of that caliber to be able to pull a move like that, just in order to, try to dismiss an idea,
Yep.
But that's the thing. We see this all the time. They see it all the time too. I mean, we got to at least give them that. I mean, they're constantly having this argument back and forth, creation and evolution, and that's what Steve's channel is all about. And I understand that, and I understand that they feel like they're fighting the good fight. But what they're doing is, it literally is active, fluid scientism in motion. And, they rail against the religion on the other side of it while they're promoting their own biological philosophy themselves, and they don't realize it has religious tenets.
That's all religion over. This is all we've been talking about here today is religion. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's belief without evidence. There's her evidence, right? I mean, this was a joke.
Yeah.
That's a joke.
Yeah. And what? Another thing, let's jump to, they really don't like the idea of entropy. I hear it so many times that they always use that as some type of backhanded attack towards somebody trying to argue against evolution. It's the weirdest thing in the world.
It's pretty easy to understand. The third grader can understand it. They witness it every day.
Oh my goodness. It's too
I mean,
funny.
you could get more in depth with it. Obviously, you can get into Gibbs free energy. That's getting into quite a bit more depth. However, conceptually, it's the same. It's entropy.
Yeah.
The Gibbs free energy is just describing it for you. It's giving you equations. It's giving you descriptions. But entropy is entropy. Everything, like Isaac Asimov said, everything deteriorates. Everything. So I don't know. We're talking about the second law of thermodynamics. I mean, they're supposed to be scientists. You can't get any more science than the laws of thermodynamics. I mean, they're the pillars of science.
Yeah.
For crying out loud.
Yeah. Yeah, it is what it is. It is what it is. Hopefully this, presentation like this can, I mean, essentially, I only hope it helps their argument. That's essentially why we're out here. We're sharpening each other's arguments. I don't want to see dishonesty. I don't want to see belief systems, dogmas, or a lack of knowledge of your own belief system. That's what I see all of this is people are defending a religion and they don't know it. And that really pisses him off when he pointed out too.
Yeah.
That one really makes him mad.
Yeah. Yeah, I flip it right over on them.
Yeah, yeah. Because you're coming with the actual science. You're calling out what isn't science. That's why I'm happy to have you on the channel and do these presentations. But so thank you, John.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah,
and my privilege to do it.
Excellent. Excellent. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the presentation today?
Well, I really don't think I need to add anything to this one either.
Yeah, this one's pretty good. Topped it off. Well, I'll go ahead and finish up. Everybody, thank you very much for listening. Seriously, just keep an eye out. We're going to be doing some more of these. John will come up with one all of a sudden. Like he did this one. Something spurred him and he went crazy and made one up in 3 days. It was great. So just keep an eye out. We'll be covering more and more of these issues. And but thank you very much for listening. Everybody have a wonderful day and take care.